because when the searches were going on, it was now a few days, the head in the bucket had started to decompose and it was starting to let out a foul smell. The two men both decided that, Welcome to Murder on the Motherland, the podcast where I take you on a trip to Africa and let you in on some of the African true crime stories. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this podcast, hi, thank you for coming. Today's story takes us to a small country that is landlocked known as Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is actually my country of origin, and it's unfortunate that it is showing up on this podcast. However, there are evil people everywhere. A few fun facts about Zimbabwe. Actually, Zimbabwe was one of the richest countries in Africa not too long ago because it has a lot of minerals. It has gold, diamonds, ivory, just to mention a few. However, due to politics, these minerals have been exploited in a way that does not benefit the country. Zimbabwe was one of the last few countries to attain independence from Britain in 1980, which is not too long ago. Anyway, today we're not talking only about Zimbabwe. Today's story takes us to Makore village, which is just a small village in one of the states in Zimbabwe. So we have a lot of states, and one of them is Mrewa. Actually, that's where I went to school, at Mrewa High School, which is about an hour and 20 minutes from Harare, which is the capital city of the country. This is located in Mashonaland East Province, and it has a population of about 9,000 people. A quarter of the area is covered with commercial farms, although most people do subsistence farming, which they specialize in vegetables and maize. So basically, most of the people in Makore village farm to eat. They grow most of their food. So our victim today was a boy named Tapiwa Makore. Tapiwa Makore was born in 2013 in Nyamtumbu village, which is also located in Mrewa. He was born to his parents, Munyarazi Makore and Linda Munyori. Tapiwa was the middle child of 3, and he was the only son with an older sister and a younger sister. At the time of his passing, he was around 7 years old. By that time, he was attending Nyamtumbu Primary School in his 2nd grade. He's described by his family and friends is very cheerful. Although he had just started school, he was also described to be very smart and friendly. On September 17, 2020, Tapiwa's mom sent Tapiwa to the garden. She packed his food and drinks. He was gonna go there and spend the whole day, if not most of the day. He was going to the garden to take care of their garden because there were cows that were in the area, and these cows would usually come and eat from the garden. The garden was a distance from their compound. You couldn't really see the garden from the house. However, you weren't gonna walk a kilometer or more than that. It wasn't that far. This day, his mom sent him to the garden, which he has always done. So this is not his first time going to the farm. The garden was surrounded by other gardens belonging to the neighbors, and other kids would also be over there watching over their gardens. So Tapiwa left that morning, and his mom stayed behind and was going to join him later that day after completing the chores at the house. Later that day, before dinner, his mom is like, okay, let me just go and see what Tapiwa is up to and get some vegetables to cook for dinner, and then also to just get him so they can come back home together. So she tells Tapiwa's dad to accompany her to the garden. When they got to the garden, they saw that Tapiwa was not at the place that he usually sat at. So Tapiwa had made a shed of dried grass straws that will provide shade for him, and he would usually just sit under that shed and have his lunch down there, maybe just sleep, like some comfort in a way, because it was too hot to just be outside in the bare sun. When they get there, the first thing they see is that he's not in the shed. So when the mom went and looked a little closer, she then saw that his clothes, his shoes, and his lunchbox were all still there, meaning he was around, like, close by. He had not gone far away, because he probably would have carried his shoes, his stuff. Basically, he wouldn't just leave it there. When she saw that the stuff was still there, the mom and dad started calling his name, Tapiwa, 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 and he's not answering. But at the same time, they could hear the other kids playing around close by. This was very unlike him, because he would always be close to the garden or playing with the other kids. So they decided to go over there. and asked other kids if they had seen him, or actually check if he was playing over there, and he just could not hear them. When they got there, they started asking them, hey, have you seen Tapiwa? We saw his stuff over there and he's not there. And then some of the kids were like, oh no, we didn't see him, until like one of the kids was like, oh yeah, I last saw him swimming in a pond that was close by. So this pond was usually used to water the garden and also as water to drink for the cows. When they heard that, the mom started panicking. She started alerting the other neighbors so that maybe they can come and help her look for him. Also, because she had heard that he was swimming in the pond close by, she then started thinking that maybe he had drowned. I don't think he knew how to really swim at that age, because it was very unlike him to just go away and vanish and not be where he's supposed to be. The neighbors started coming to help because they heard her calling out for help. And then when the neighbors came, the men started going into the pond to look for him. And the women were now just checking the surrounding areas to see like maybe he's somewhere, something happened. So they're just looking everywhere for him. Mind you, this is in the rural areas. The search party was running behind because the sun at this point was starting to go down. Some men are in the pond looking for him. The women are just walking around looking for him, and there's still no sign of him. Time goes by and the sun is already down. They still haven't found him. At this point, the search party has to go back to their own houses because it's getting dark and there's really not much they can do because they can hardly see. Yes, some people had flashlights, but it was getting so dark that they needed to retire for the night. At this point, they used to tell the mom like, hey, you know what, we'll wake up early in the morning and continue the search, because at this point we don't know where else to look. And also, even if we want to keep expanding the search, we really can't because we can't see. So the search party retires and then they wake up the following morning to continue the search. September 18th, 2020. Early that morning, just before the search was about to happen, a neighbor had woken up and saw his dogs holding what looked like a human torso. This torso had both arms, both legs, the neck, the head, and the private parts dismembered. That's when he was calling his wife. He's like, hey, come see what I'm seeing. She sees the thing that the dogs are holding. At this point, him and his wife had already heard of the little boy who had gone missing. So one thing about Zimbabwe, it's a very communal country. The benefits of that is that your neighbor's problem is your problem, especially in the rural areas. Whenever something like this happens, everybody is hands on deck. So the news of the little boy missing had already spread because most of the people had already gone to help with the search party. So him seeing this in his yard in the morning, that was his first thought. Like, okay, we already know there's a boy missing and this looks like a human torso. So at that point, he starts calling the neighbors, alerting them about the torso that was in his compound. When the neighbors heard this, they started calling out for Tapiwa's parents to come see what the dogs had hold. They were suspecting this was Tapiwa because of what the torso looked like. It looked like that of a small child. At this point, it seemed plausible that it was him. The neighbors then advised Tapiwa's mom not to come to the scene because it was too gruesome for her to experience. After the torso was discovered, the Mareo police was alerted and an investigation was launched. After the police launched the investigations, they decided to search all of the residents of Makore village's houses as part of their investigation. On September 20th, the detectives discovered a pair of trousers in one Tapiwa Makore senior's kitchen hut, which had blood stains all over it. After being interviewed by the police, Tapiwa Makore senior then confessed that the pair of trousers didn't belong to him, but however it belonged to Tafatwa Shamba. He mentioned that Tafatwa had asked him to hold the pair for him. I don't know why he didn't get to ask why, or if he didn't get to look through the pair of trousers to see what it was that he was being asked to hold. However, he just mentioned that he didn't really know what it was exactly. He was just asked to hold it. So on September 23, the police then went and picked up Tafatwa Shamba as a suspect. They then held an intensive search of his residence. While they were performing this search, they found a white stained vest with blood that was suspected to be that of Tapiwa Makore Jr. Tafatwa ended up confessing after the discovery of the vest. The torso was taken for a post-mortem and the cause of death could not be determined. 2 days later, the police went and picked up Tapiwa Makore due to the fact fact that they had found Tafatso's pair of trousers in his house. This made him an accomplice for this case, because it was like, how do you have a suspect's trouser with the victim's blood? It means you know something. So at this point, they were like, okay, we're going to take you two into custody because it seems like you know more than you're letting on. When both men were now in custody, the detectives decided to question both of them. Tapiwa Makore pleaded not guilty, but confessed to the detectives about Tafatso's pair of trousers, saying he had no knowledge of how the blood had gotten on the trousers. He was just asked to keep them by Tafatso. Tapiwa then stood on his word and he did not say anything else. Like, he was not going to give any more information. To him, he was not guilty, like he had pleaded. When the detectives went to interview Tafatso, they let him know what Tapiwa had said, which incriminated only him of the killing of Tapiwa Jr. So as you can see by now that we have two Tapiwas, we have Tapiwa Makore Senior and we have Tapiwa Makore Jr. These two are indeed related. So Tapiwa Makore Senior is the uncle of Tapiwa Makore Jr., who is the victim today. So when the detectives went to interview Tafatso, they then told him like, hey, you know what, we just spoke with Tapiwa and Tapiwa is refusing that he knows anything. However, at this point, they had already tested the blood on the trousers and it matched with Tapiwa Makore Jr.'s blood. So they did know that the blood was of the victim. After hearing this, Tafatso then decided to do a full confession, citing all the details of what had truly happened on 17 September 2020. A little background story on the two men who are the killers in today's story. Tafatso Shamba is a 40-year-old man. He is described to have been a very intelligent man in school, such that in his early years of school, he did first and second grade and had to skip to sixth grade because of his outstanding grades. He went to Nyamtundure Primary School. For high school, he attended an unnamed mission school in Cheerful. Those who knew him said he was a hard worker and a law-abiding citizen, as he had never been arrested before this incident. However, some people do not completely agree with this narrative. He was married before and he later got divorced. It is said his wife ran away from their matrimonial home with their kids due to the fact that he was very abusive. He would always beat his wife, he would always beat his kids, to the point that it was becoming deadly. Her relatives say that one day her and Tafatso had a disagreement, which led to him beat her horribly and also threatening to kill her, which made her to run away. It's not really clear whether Tafatso has always resided in Makore village or that he moved there. However, at the time of this incident, that's where he was residing. Tafatso Shamba and Tapiwa Makore Senior met when Tafatso was looking for a job at Tapiwa Makore Senior's farm. Tapiwa Makore is a 57-year-old man. He is married with kids. He is the victim's uncle, as he is the victim's father's brother. At the time of the murder, Tapiwa Makore did not stay in Makore village full-time. His main residence was in Harare. However, he had a cabbage farm in Makore which he had just started, and he would always go there to manage it. At this point, he had 5 other people who were working on the farm together with Tafatso. So Tafatso and Tapiwa got fairly close when they were working together, and they would just spend a lot of time, which made them to create a relationship. In Tafatso's confession, he mentioned that a few weeks before, Tafatso and Tapiwa and 5 other men decided to hang out while drinking some alcohol together. When they were chilling together, Tapiwa decided to seclude Tafatso. When he had taken him to a secluded place, that's when he brought up the idea of doing rituals for the success of their business. At this point, he was telling him that if they go through with this, he will get rich. And then at the same time, when he's also getting rich, he will start paying Tafatso more. He wanted him to think about these rituals. And at this point, he had only chosen Tapiwa because that's who he had gotten close to more than he had gotten close to the other people. Since the both men were intoxicated at this point, Tafatso just thought maybe it's just the alcohol that was talking. However, he didn't know that this was actually serious. So a few days go by and Tapiwa brought the idea up again. Tafatso mentions that neither men were drunk, and Tapiwa then told him hey, what do you think? At this point, Tafatso didn't give him an answer, but then he had decided to think about it. So it's hey, you know what, I'll think about it and I'll let you know. Tafatso's standards of living were also not what he wanted. He wanted a Honda Fit for himself. He wanted a business. He wanted money. He just saw himself living a better life than the one he was living. It seemed like without the rituals rituals, there was no way he was going to accomplish that. So at this point, it's just like, you know what, maybe this is the way out. This is what I need to become the rich boss that I want to be. When Tapiwa then came back for an update on what Tafazo wanted to do, Tafazo then agreed. Then Tapiwa told him like, hey, there's a witch doctor who's going to be performing these rituals, and he needs a head of a child, a male child. At first, Tafazo was thinking like, this is just going to be easy because he would just go and find anyone's head. However, he was informed like, no, they need the head of a male child who's a relative of the people who are going to do the rituals. Between the two of them, they were the ones who were supposed to produce the head. Unfortunately, Tafazo then told Tapia that, hey, you know what? I don't have any young male relatives I can use, I guess, in their family. I don't know if all the males were already older or that the children were female. At this point, Tapiwa Senior ended up suggesting Tapiwa Makore Jr., his brother's child. When they agreed on him, it was now just a matter of how they were going to lure him. Tapiwa's aunt and other relatives mentioned how weeks before his death, his uncle had tried to entice him with candy and other goodies to lure him away from his home to no avail. On September 17th, when Tapiwa was sent to the garden, the two men already knew this was their opportunity, since Tapiwa Makore Sr. was already keeping an eye on Tapiwa Jr. Tapiwa Makore Sr. then sent Tafato Shampa to the garden. He asked him to lure Tapiwa with the promise of giving him foodstuffs when they got to his house. With how smoothly the luring happened, it shows how Tapiwa Jr. already knew Tafato. Because of that, he was able to follow him to his house without fighting or even being suspicious. When they got to his house, Tafazo then gave him the food that he had promised him, along with some brewed alcoholic drink that he had put some sugar to make it more palatable for him. He kept on persuading him to keep drinking to make sure he got drunk enough to fall asleep. It didn't take long for the 7-year-old to get drunk and fall asleep. After Tapiwa was knocked out, Tafazo then left the house and headed out to a nearby bar. He spent a few hours there before the rumors of the missing boy started spreading. When he heard the news, together with the other local men who were there with him, he then got up and joined the search party that was looking for the boy. And all along, he knew Tapiwa was locked up, drunk at his house. After hours of searching unsuccessfully, Tapiwa's parents and the search party retired for the night, with hopes of continuing the following morning. When Tafazo left the search party and went home, Tapiwa Sr. decided to then follow him to his house where they were keeping Tapiwa Jr. and they would then decide what they would now do to the boy. At this point, it's not really clear whether the alcohol had not worn off or if they kept giving him more. What is clear though is that according to Tafadzwa, the boy was still sedated. They carried him about 2 kilometers from Tafadzwa's house towards the mountain, where they then would finally take his life. It was already after midnight and most of the villagers, if not all of them, had fallen asleep. On their way there, Tafazo was holding the intoxicated child, while Tapiwa Senior was the one carrying the flashlight to light up the way. When they got to the place, they then laid Tapiwa down onto the ground in preparation of killing him. Since Tapiwa Jr. was already unconscious, they didn't need to strangle him. Instead, they just started dismembering him alive. After dismembering his head, he then started cutting off his arms, then his legs, then his genitals, until all that remained was just a torso with no arms, no legs, no head, no genitals, like just basically a torso with nothing. When they were done, they then started packing the arms and legs into different plastic bags. They took the head and separately put it in a bucket to preserve it, as it was the most important part to them for performing the rituals. They then covered up the blood which was on the ground, and they proceeded to carry the torso and the dismembered body parts with them. After the act, the two men decided to make their way back to their respective houses. On the way back, Tapiwa Senior was carrying the bucket with the head and the plastic bags containing the different body parts. Tafadzwa Shamba was the one who was carrying the torso, and then he started complaining because I guess to him the torso was now very heavy and he could no longer continue the journey while carrying it. What's not clear is whether they decided to discard the torso there or if they decided to exchange what they were both holding and then ended up discarding it a little later. What is clear though is that a few meters away from where the houses were, that's where they ended up discarding the torso, which would then be found by the dogs the following morning that they would haul to the neighbor's house. According to Tafadzwa, they threw the plastic bags which had the arms and limbs into the pit latrine. And the genitals, however, were not mentioned or were never found. And to this day, it is still unclear whether they also discarded the genitals or they kept them. I don't know, but we also don't know where the genitals went. The head, which they then put in the bucket, was then taken to one of their house for safekeeping, as it was going to take them a few more days until they're able to take it to the witch doctor. After the torso was found and the police had launched the investigation, they had started searching the houses. When the searches were going on, it was now a few days, the head in the bucket had started to decompose and it was starting to let out a foul smell. The two men both decided that, you know what, it's better for them to boil the head, with the hopes that if they boil it, it will stop the decomposing process and then it will gain them a few more days of keeping the head without them getting caught. The day after the torso was found, before any arrest had been made, before Tavato had even confessed, a head was found in the area not far away from the village, and rumors started spreading that it was Tapiwa's head. At this point, Tapiwa Makore Senior, who was still not arrested or even suspected of doing anything, was the loudest of them all. At first, when he found out that the boy was missing, even though he already knew, when he was told that the boy was missing, he started condemning the parents, like, why would you let your child go to the farm by himself, even though he knew that this was a normal occurrence at this house. When the head was then now found, he then decided, you know what, let's just bury the body, let's just bury the torso that we have in the head. Even though everybody else was skeptical about the head that they had found, he then just started saying, this is the head, this is his head, we are wasting time, let's just bury his body and the head that we found. But then the parents knew that something was wrong. I think everyone with eyes could see that, you know, the torso we found a few days ago was not as decomposed as the head that they were finding, which already looked weathered and it had been decomposed way too much than the rest of the body. The family then refused, and then they're like, you know what, we're not gonna do that, we're just gonna go to the police and give them the head that we found. If they say that's his head, then we'll bury him, but we're not gonna bury our son's body with a head that's not his own. The parents then called the police and sent the head for a DNA as well as an autopsy, which then later showed that the head was that of a teenage child, actually between the age of 13 to 15, and also the stage of decomposition was way past that of a child who had just been missing or who had just passed away a few days ago. This was just even more sad because it then showed that there was another child who was also murdered and dismembered with his or her head discarded the way it was. After the confession from Tafadzwa, the investigators decided to then take him back to the scene of where everything had happened, where the pit latrine that he had spoken about was, where they had discarded the plastic bags, where they had discarded the torso. He was supposed to just do a walkthrough of his confession to see if everything that he had said in his confession matched the areas that he was talking about. They were doing this in the hopes that maybe if they go to the crime scene, they'll be able to gather more evidence. When they took him back, they went to the crime scene where they had dismembered him. Because this was out in the woods, they did not really find much. They did see the place where it was, but it was already covered in dead leaves, the soil and the debris. Much of the blood had already spilled into the ground. What they did find though was when he then took them to the pit latrine, they ended up destroying it. So they broke it down. They even had to jump inside and they were able to fish out the plastic bags that had the boy's body parts that were dismembered. This was a really sad thing because although the investigators were happy that they had found the body of Tapiwa and they had found this evidence, it was really just a sad situation. Because of the confession that Tafadzo had given and the evidence that the investigators had, they decided to remand the two men. They were not allowed any bail. So the two men were then kept in prison until the date of trial. So fast forward to March 2021. On March 27th, Tapiwa's headless body and limbs and arms were then buried in his hometown in Morel. The family had pleaded with the murderers to tell them where they had put the head, but the two men just refused. In June 2023, almost 3 years after the murder took place, the court was ready for the proceedings. All this time, the two men had been in custody awaiting their trial. On June 29th, both men were then found guilty of murdering Tapiwa. They were to await their sentencing, which then later took place on July July 12, 2023. Both men involved in the carrying out of this crime were sentenced to death by hanging due to the gruesome nature of their crime. Other details that ended up emerging after the trial were that an unnamed person was paid to come and collect the boy's head. It is said that week when the police were doing the investigations, the man just came and then took the head, and he was supposed to go deliver the head to the witch doctor who was in Mozambique. The man goes to Mozambique to deliver the head. When he gets there and he's talking to the witch doctor and he's about to offer the head, the witch doctor then says that the head doesn't work because it has been boiled. They need a head that hasn't been tempered with. So at this point, it seems like they just killed Tapiwa for no reason, because after the witch doctor refused to accept the head, the man who had brought it, he was given back the head. And because the person who had brought it had already started hearing the news about what was happening with the case back home, he then just decided to discard it. So it's very unfortunate because Tapiwa then ended up just being buried incomplete. This is a very sad story of Tapiwa Makore Jr., who was betrayed by his own uncle, all because he loved money. Maybe his family will feel like they got justice. So guys, this is our story today. Let me know what you think about this story. I would like to hear from you guys, and if you have any stories that you would like for me to cover, which are in Africa of course, just hit me up and I'll cover them. Have a good one.